Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the FPL Script. This is Season 3, Episode 10, our Gameweek 6 preview. I'm Wildcarding, and here I'm joined by my co-host at Schadenfreude with the one. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. As everyone knows, Fran is on Wildcard, so his team is going to be much more interesting than mine. So let's quickly go through our Game Week 5 review, and so we can move on to the actual juicy segment of the podcast.
Yeah, surely. I mean, my team was pretty dull. I actually had Konsa on the bench, but unlike people who had the fortune of owning Jota, I guess, to get extremely jammy bench points, I owned and started João Pedro instead. Maybe it was a skill issue to start João Pedro, considering I think there's a bit of a learning point maybe to be made around how cautious Fabian might be as a manager, despite the priority and importance of a certain player like João Pedro. But that's that. Dunk 0-pointer, Bruno Eze blanks, João Pedro, Vardy blank with 2 free transfers. Doesn't feel so good, to be honest. Particularly when the 1 free transfer move for me would have been Saka to Son, but I don't think I was really considering it because even with a really considerably high free transfer value, I didn't see the value in going actually for the Son move when Salah actually had such great EV, and I was pretty confident that his minutes would be good and that he wouldn't be subbed off at 70 minutes. But that's that. What about you, JD?
Before you move on, would you have Wildcard?
Oh, sorry. I think your audio's a little weird. Try again.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Let me know, chat, if you guys think that JD's audio is a little bit weird today. If it's just me, then it's just me. But if you guys can hear perfectly fine, just let us know.
Yeah, can someone let us know so that we either
bugging audio?
Okay, buggy.
I think it's fine now.
Just 1 second.
Yeah, it's fine now. I can hear you. I can hear you perfectly fine now.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, fixed itself.
Oh, okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, so assuming that's that issue has resolved itself.
Okay. Maybe it's still bugged. Do you want to try replug your mic or something? I think the allegations are that you're underwater.
I mean, let me do this. Let's see if I can.
We could try restart the Discord call. Shall we do that? Oh, it's good now.
I can disconnect.
Sounds good, I think.
Okay. We've cooked a very late meal, but so my question to you was, before we got derailed by yet another technical bug, was would you have wildcarded in 6 if you had done just Saka to Son captain?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then I think there wasn't too much in this. So just, I mean, my team, Fran mentioned to me that our scores have been pretty similar for almost all game weeks, but the triple captaincy clearly is the big differential for Fran. And for me, I think maybe I made a mistake with fielding both Ben Brereton, Diaz and João Pedro over Konsa, but even with limited minutes, BBD had much more EV, and I don't know. I mean, the Konsa goal was just a dagger, and I have a Muniz assist on the bench as well, which Fran has been very kind to hide that. So I just think a horrible week for me. I think I barely scraped by with red. It was almost a neutral, like a gray arrow, but ultimately the Rogers bonus point got me close to that. So yeah, we can just move on to Wildcard 6, which is a much more exciting topic.
Yeah, sure. So this is going to be my wildcard draft as it stands right now. Wanted to get the faces here without the EV, but this is obviously FPL Reviews interface. So if you're any interested in really sort of looking at what FPL Review is about, please feel free to have a look. But yeah, I mean, look, this draft is, a small consideration that Raya's potentially out for the weekend. I think I would have gone Flecken anyways. And part of this is that I think if I have confidence in the minutes of Lewis and Guardiola going forwards, I do think it's okay to temporarily sidestep both the Liverpool and Arsenal defense and go towards a team like this. It has an extremely deep defense anyways with Davis and Dunk. These are 2 players that are absolutely nailed. And I do think what's nice about Davis is that, yes, there's going to be many game week where you're expecting Ipswich to concede literally 2 goals plus, which is a huge detriment towards his points. But he is, as we mentioned previously on the pod, someone who's like Dowdy on steroids. So I think that in the future, if there's ever game weeks where I can't, let's say, get a Man City league and I need an auto sub, potentially, I think Davis is very strong. Whilst Dunk is someone who covers some really nice fixtures. Like both Davis and Dunk do specifically cover Game Week 9, which is a bit of a pinch point for my defense because that's when Arsenal plays Liverpool. But generally speaking, these are 2 nailed players to sort of remediate, I think, when I have these Man City players. So that's why I have this defense. In the midfield, it's effectively very similar to my Game Week 1 structure, but then remodified so that I can actually attack Arsenal in a triple up through double Arsenal offense. I've decided not to go for Solanke because I really do believe that he's not on penalties, and I think Son is on penalties. Maybe as we record this podcast and Spurs somehow get a penalty versus Karabag, I'll be proven wrong, but I think I like the idea of going for Havertz as a 2 game week punt, because when I think about it, if I went for Raya, I'm not transferring him out. If I went for Saliba, I'm definitely transferring him out to Porro in 2 game weeks time, or later down the line, he's another transfer to maybe back into a Liverpool defender. So the way I see Havertz, I don't think it's too dissimilar to any other sort of different triple Liverpool variations. Going Havertz in the short term, I think, is an insane boost of expected value. And then he becomes a future transfer to Solanke. And that excess money also gives me a little bit of breathing room to maybe upgrade someone like Bruno or play around with some other changes, like, for example, that Winks position. I'm not going to own Winks. I think I am very comfortable going for Tyler Dibbling, so that's going to be the one change on this team. The team in the midfield is Bruno, Saka, and Mbeumo, Winks, Eze, and then the front line is Haaland, Calvert-Lewin, and Havertz, just to sort of remind people. But Eze, Bruno, Calvert-Lewin, I think these are picks for effectively the foreseeable 6-7 weeks, including Mbeumo as well, where you don't really need to make any transfers with them. So that's why I think I have the opportunity here to squeeze a 4.5 who has effectively no playing value for this in terms of being a starter for my team in Winks. But actually, yeah, if I go Dibbling, then I probably have a little bit of optionality if his minutes remain as good as they look so far, which, look, for Southampton, it's very hard to even make such a statement, but I'm comfortable with the team as it is. Son picked up a knock.
Oh,
interesting.
That's going to make things
interesting. Is it a real knock, though? Or one of those
Saka knocks?
Yeah.
So I'm so glad you went with Havertz, by the way, because that is what we spent last week talking about, right? Whether to go double Arsenal defense or to go double Arsenal attack.
Yeah.
So I definitely see the appeal in getting Havertz and Saka. My question to you would be, so for example, later down the line, if you were to reduce your investment in the forward line, would you do something like Havertz to Wood and then upgrade someone, or what are the future lines that you're seeing in review right now?
I think it's always Havertz to Solanke, basically.
Oh, okay, okay.
But look, I mean, people are mentioning that if Son has a knock, then I would have to generally just reconsider going for Solanke, because that's pen share right there, right?
Pen share. Yep.
So yeah, I mean, we'll find. I think what's nice is Ange is a very honest guy, so we'll get a presser and we'll get some information on that. But yeah, look, as everyone knows in FPL, your drafts are live and not final.
I don't think the Europa teams get another press conference.
You don't think so?
Yeah, I doubt it, because what I remember from last season is the Thursday and Friday games for Conference League as well. They never got any updates. Not the Friday, I mean Wednesday and Thursday. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, basically. So I might be wrong there, but from what I remember, some teams definitely did not have 2 press conferences. Whatever was said at the end of the European game was what we were going off of.
I just think it's a Sunday game, right? So maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, no, I'm only talking about before deadline. So we'll see if that's the case. Regardless of that, I just feel like this draft is so much more robust than drafts where I've seen. For example, I think Semenyo is genuinely a good pick.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it's a transfer that you're booking in 2 weeks later, essentially, because he has no pen share. So even if he's going to play 90 minutes, I don't know how the plan is. So I see you grimaced a little bit. So maybe you have some thoughts on that.
I think it's because the way Semenyo works in a draft right now is you do need 8 attackers. Because instead of trying to book a transfer for someone who costs 5.6 million in your team, who might actually be a good stable pick after that horrendous run. I generally do not think there is a 3-piece run of games that is worse than Bournemouth. It's Arsenal at home, Aston Villa away, Man City at home, 8, 9, 10. So yeah, if you go for Semenyo, you're basically telling yourself you have 8 attackers. And what João Pedro has sort of provided as a bit of an issue is if, let's say, he has any sort of derailments with his sort of progression, or if you need to stretch to Wood, which is basically an additional 0.5 million in value to kind of expend on rotation, then yeah, it's tough to actually fit Semenyo in a team. And I think one other player that's interesting in Bournemouth is Marcus Tavernier. He has played really good minutes this season. Underlyings have obviously flown up because a bit of a position change, you can argue. But it's hard seeing myself go for a Bournemouth player, particularly if I want to sidestep that rotation aspect or the need to sort of circumvent 8, 9, 10.
Makes sense. One of the questions I see in the chat, which maybe we can take right now, is where is Rogers? So I'm assuming it's the final 0.5 million. You already have more than decent team value, so you've tried to fit in as many players as you can, right?
If I'm being honest, I think if I can squeeze 0.1 value from Luis Diaz, I could change Davis to Greaves, and I can actually go Rogers over Winks.
And I think you will, right?
I think I will.
Just yeah, because I'm sure you haven't transferred him out yet, so you still own him at 5.1, right? Yeah, okay, perfect. That makes sense. Other than that, one of the questions, and I've been talking to a lot of people on Wildcard, is would you consider going for Porro on Wildcard 6 rather than Guardiola, just so that it saves your transfer around Game Week 8?
No, because I think in this structure here, as long as I have confidence in Guardiola's minutes, I don't think he becomes a transfer out. Whereas actually, if you go for Saliba, I find that he often becomes a transfer out for Porro. But Guardiola's probably a slightly better pick than Saliba in some of the mediocre games because of his sort of attacking value. So yeah, I think it does come down to the minutes. Like if, let's say, I've gotten the call wrong, then yeah, I'm more than prepared to move Guardiola into Porro. And that's probably something I'll do. But what I often find is the case with, let's say, a Haaland draft is I am recommended to either go, let's say, towards Son or Salah between 8, 10, 11, those sorts of fixture windows. And I'll need to consider whether I want to keep Haaland in the team as usual.
So roughly, I don't know if you've run any simulations, but just the number of drafts you must have run through review. What is the rough sort of transfer plan? How many transfer are you spending in the next 4 or 5 weeks?
I think I don't see, in this draft specifically, I have to make one transfer in Game Week 8, which is Havertz's Lanky. After that, it's 2 transfers in Game Week 10 or 11. So it really depends on whether I want to make that Haaland to Salah switch on 10. But that's basically free transfers there. But, you know, I'm rolling on 6, on 7, on 9, respectively. And as I said with those Haaland moves, I think I could very well just not make those moves towards Salah on 10, and we'll see what happens.
Pretty robust from the looks of it. Another question was, for example, we talked about Trent in the group chat as well. So if you were to accommodate Trent in a draft like this, what are the sacrifices that you're looking at?
I think I'd have to drop Guardiola probably and Havertz. And I'd probably also drop Davis just to squeeze that sort of money. So it would probably be Solanke and Guardiola to Trent, something like that.
Okay, that would make a lot of sense. I guess it's just about Spurs' immediate fixture, and I think Havertz just has such good fixtures. I'm so glad you are on this train because surprise, I already bought Havertz because Muniz was
seems pretty
Muniz
interesting.
was dropping in price, so I had to go for Havertz, and we'll come to captaincy later. But just out of curiosity, would you consider Saka as a captain in the next 2 weeks, or is it just going to be Haaland?
I think the week after this,
Haaland is Fulham, right?
Is closer in terms of the gap, but I think it's tough because Saka's minutes have been a little bit weird recently. So I think
Mm.
there's a genuine case to say that you could just go Haaland because you have the confidence in his minutes and so on and so forth. Um, I think I'm still probably gonna lean Haaland for captaincy for the next 2 weeks. Where are you at with that?
I unfortunately don't have a choice. So I have to captain Holland.
Fair.
So uh, I'm just going to be left hoping Saka does get reduced minutes, which seems a little far fetched. As in,
It is, yeah.
hoping for less than 75 minutes is definitely far fetched. But
Mm-hmm.
even if I get like 80-ish subs in both games, hopefully the damage is not too much, because betting against someone like Saka is going to be really painful for probably the two best fixtures in the season.
Yeah, I think if I'm being honest, I'm pretty comfortable with captaining Saka this week. It's next week that I think it's, even though the fixture is much better for Saka, I just think it's so clearly a Haaland captaincy. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at.
Yeah. So you've been monitoring price changes, obviously. Do you see any of these players dropping, as in Bruno or Eze, especially because you might get to bank 0.1 the other way as well?
It's an interesting question because I think with Bruno, his ownership is really low, and I think a lot of people are wildcarding out of him. So I feel like the only people who own Bruno now might be people like myself, like who are generally comfortable that he can actually return in the long term. And then with Eze, it's a weird one because I feel like a lot of people are considering transferring him out, right? Because he is at that Mbumo price point, and not everyone is that set on actually keeping both of these types of players within their team. So I think Eze is someone that I could be prone to taking a price drop for, but he's one of those players where, once again, I'm so comfortable owning for the medium to long term that I don't really care about it too much.
Fair enough. And also, because you don't own Salah anymore, I don't know if you've given this much of a thought, but where would you put his minutes at for the next 2 weeks? Because I know there's this feeling that his minutes might get slightly reduced, but I am firmly against that thought process. Like, I feel like his minutes are as secure as ever. Maybe the 30 minutes against West Ham make me think he will get subbed like 80-ish in the Champions League game, but I don't see how that's going to happen in the Premier League game. So do you have
Yeah,
any
I
thoughts
think
on
his
that?
minutes are probably close to perfect. I
Yeah.
think we can argue that his performances have warranted probably a sub, but
Yes.
it seems like Slot just, he's got like, he feels he needs to play Salah 90 minutes is my sort of hot
I
take.
just think that him coming on as a sub against West Ham in the Carabao Cup and scoring is just that additional boost to his minute security, if there were ever a question. Because like you said, Slot seems to be impervious to Salah's bad performances, and which is great if you own Salah, but at the same time, it is a bit of a funny situation where if you put his minutes closer to 90, he is a better captain's choice than Holland this week. But do you actually want to go for that? Because Holland is 100% going to play 90 minutes unless it's like he's already scored a hat trick and they've run away with the game. So really tough call for me. But I think with Saka, anyone that owns Saka, like you said, the decision should be fairly easy for this week and maybe next week. But next week is Fulham, so maybe we'll discuss this closer to next week's deadline.
Yeah, I think you're pretty right there. The one pick that I find always interesting to discuss like is Palmer and where his minutes are at. But yeah, shall we jump into just xMins discussion over like a lot of the wildcard picks, or what do you?
Of course. Yeah, let's go for it.
Cool. So yeah, I think starting with where I left off there, I think Palmer's the one pick that's always given me some issues in terms of like, am I structuring my team towards owning Palmer? Because if I go for someone like Palmer, then that that gives me a route towards Son on Gameweek 10, and I think that's a nice conventional line because effectively I'd have like a 2.5 BM, right, where I can sort of perpetually move between the Palmer, the Foden, the Son type of pick. If I own Bruno, then as my draft currently stands, it's not like I can really do that. Although I recognize as soon as I move out of Havertz, potentially, if I, let's say, don't go Solanke, which is weird, I feel like I still will, then yeah, there's some questions to be asked about whether I go for, let's say, a different midfield, and I can push up someone like Bruno in the future. And it's very plausible that I could maybe go Bruno to Foden, something like that. But that's one thing. I just think that his minutes so far this season have probably been because of the knock that he's had. But the reality of their bench just means that I don't see him as a 95-minute player. And I do think that that does take away from the value of Palmer. Because I think when you look at, let's say, a game like, let's say, Bournemouth, and fair enough, Salah didn't score in that game, so maybe that's the differentiation point, but he plays 90 minutes there when he absolutely doesn't really need to, and I think the game was very, very easily won. Whereas, let's say, within the Chelsea game, you know, you can say someone like Palmer was getting hacked, and I think that that's true, but he was still subbed off because there's like a world-class bench there, and I think Maresca doesn't feel the pressure in the same way to play him 95 minutes a game. Because, yeah, I think you could make the same argument that to protect Salah, he probably shouldn't be playing 95 minutes of football. He played 3 fixtures in a row, effectively, where he played like 95 in the league in the previous match, 89 in the Champions League, then he played 95 for Bournemouth. Is that really what you need from a 33-year-old? Probably not, but that was done, right? So I just think that, yeah, Palmer's minutes are a little bit worse, and that's why I'm not so keen on him. And I also have, once again, going back to the usual argument about Bruno, like there's no reason to ignore a pick like Bruno as long as he's alive. But I don't know what your thoughts are on Bruno, because I kind of want maybe some thoughts. I mean, like some people will generally just say, yeah, we're watching United week in week. They're a horrible team. How can you still go Bruno? Are you still a Bruno believer?
Being a Bruno believer is different than, I think, thinking he's a long-term hold in FPL.
Okay.
But in my case, I do agree with you in a broad sense, where 90 minutes on penalties, if Eriksen does not play on set pieces, because we've seen that Eriksen has just taken over all the set pieces when he's on the pitch. So maybe when Eriksen does not play as much, because hopefully Ten Hag is not going to flog him 2 to 3 times a week for 70 to 80 minutes. So assuming Bruno is on some set pieces during that time and he plays 90 minutes every single game, I just think given the uncertainty we've seen, so I just went back and checked the points totals average at this stage last season, and we are almost 100 points off worse this season. Now, I need to double check that, but because I had to do it in a hurry, but on the face of it, it just felt implausible. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind is, and this can be easily checked, is what are the total like mints per match played that players are getting? Because to your point about Palmer, I would also argue that the way Maresca has rested someone like Fofana, who came off the back of a lengthy injury, has been in complete contrast to Arne Slot continuing to play Konate in every single game. Even though we know that Konate is definitely injury prone, like we've seen. Now, this is there are no shades thrown at Slot here. I'm just saying that the styles of managers are very clearly seen, are completely different. So with Fofana's treatment, because I was looking at Fofana or Colwill, which centre back I could potentially buy from Chelsea in Gameweek 8. So I've seen that Colwill seems to be the more secure one, just because
100%.
He pairs with any other centre back at Chelsea, and even if Tosin plays, it looks like Tosin is going to play right back. Did he play in the last game? Which was,
yeah, I mean they've been struggling because of the, I think, knock on Gusto, and then obviously James is out indefinitely still. So
yeah. He is, yes. So just looking at those, I just feel like the more players drop out because of injuries, the more it makes me think Bruno is just a great pick on, especially on Wildcard, because even though you lose, let's say 0.1 further on him if he is blanks against Spurs, if you have no intention of transferring him out, as soon as he starts returning, it's the price is going to revert, because there is no way with his underlines this season that the returns won't come. And not just this season, is we've seen that over the past 5-6 seasons. So even if you assume a base rate of 0.3 XA and 0.21 to 0.2 XG per 90, he has been massively underperforming, right? So I don't hate it at all. The thing is, as a United fan, I am biased unnecessarily to not buy him, maybe just so that I get to enjoy seeing him play and not curse him out when he misses an obvious goal chance or a player misses out on his assist. But yeah, just a long-winded way of saying I really rate the Bruno pick, and managers that go for him, yeah, absolutely kudos.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, some of the picks that people have already sort of mentioned in chat. So like, let's discuss Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And I don't think there's anything to really discuss with his minutes, but then it's about him competing with the likes of João Pedro and Wood. Now, João Pedro is probably out for 2 weeks bare minimum, but I'm sure there's going to be some worlds where maybe holding him on a wild card could make sense for some people who maybe are expecting him to come back on Game Week 9, that sort of thing. I don't think it's that easy to go João Pedro, though. I feel like this is the time to probably ignore him for now and then actually just buy him back later when he's fit. And I do think that with Fabian being quite cautious as a manager, that we'll probably see his mins take a bit of time to come back to a good level, right? Because he kind of has to rebuild his fitness, and then you already have this initial setback to the setback. So there's that. I think one point I'd like to make about Nottingham Forest is I think we're not categorizing the quality of team between Everton and Nottingham Forest correctly. Like, Nottingham Forest are not a good team because they're a good offense. They're a good team because they're mostly a good defense, more than anything. So I feel like when we're talking about how good the difference is between Wood and DCL, probably the difference is on finishing, right? We know Calvert-Lewin is a poor finisher, but there's a huge fixture gap. And I think if you look at, let's say, probably expected goals over the next few weeks, because Everton's fixtures are that good, I don't see a huge gap in the expected goals that I would see between Everton and Nottingham Forest. So then it goes back to things like, is Calvert-Lewin going to play 85 to 95 minutes a game? Probably. Is Wood somewhere between 71 and 85? Probably, right? And that's going to have differences in terms of outcomes. So from that perspective, I think I'm quite comfortable going Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and particularly within my structure, there are weeks where I would like to bench Wood. Like, for example, if I look at Forest's fixtures, I want to bench him on Game Week 7. I won't be able to do that if I go for the structure. And that's something to think about. I do think that Wood is competing with DCL, but I think the idea that he's far clear of DCL, I'm not sure if I really buy it. Yes, of course, you can make the argument about finishing, but I don't know where you're at with that.
I think your minutes assessment is spot on. There is no doubt about that. Or rather, I feel very similar to that assessment, where I'm using around 85 and decaying Wood's minutes to, let's say, 85, 82, 81, and then not dipping beyond a certain point, because I feel like even if he has competition later on, if, let's say, Avoni, whenever he's fit, or if someone else plays there in the last 10-15 minutes and manages to impress, I don't think it's going to go beyond that. But I also think that DCL just has that added advantage of 85 average and then a slower decay maybe. Because like we've discussed on this pod before. By the way, should we accept our flowers for getting the Wood penalty share right?
Yeah, we should. Actually, yeah, let's just take some time here. Yeah. Shout out to all of you guys who've owned Morgan Gibbs White for the last year and a half. Ridiculous the amount of EV you guys have gained, that you think you've gained, but that really you've lost. I remember back at free at 29, people sort of saying that Wood is unnecessary risk. Well, what can I say? If you added the pen share, you never know. But
yeah, absolutely. And it's good to see that pan out, because we said that about Chris Wood, and the same thing happened with Mateta, even though it was less likely that if you are let's say a tall dominant striker in your team, it does seem to be the case that there is a proclivity to just grabbing the penalty, unless you are bad at actually taking penalties. And Wood has been exceptional at taking penalties. We've
probably talked about it, but it's not even just his record in a sense. He's 20, I think he's like 30 and 33, but it's the fact that he actually hasn't missed a penalty for the last 8 years. So it's like, it's a pretty good run. So yeah, I mean, shout outs to Chris Wood for getting on pens.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad we finally got to put that to bed. And we also know that
was not
DCL
a
is
penalty,
definitely.
by the way. I will also add that
Oh,
was
it
definitely
wasn't.
not a
Yes,
penalty.
yes, yes,
Cheeky.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, apparently, the panel that looks at all the VAR decisions also voted 2-3 that Gibbs White should not have been sent off. As in,
Mm-hmm.
2 of the 5 panelists thought he should not have been sent off, which is crazy to me. But
Fair
look,
enough.
that's where we are, I guess, with
Yeah.
the refereeing these days. Oh, sorry, it was technically not a VAR decision because it was a second yellow, but
Yeah, it was yeah.
nonetheless. But yeah, that's all I have to say. I think we are all aligned with both TCL and Wood,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen a lot of teams with both in them,
TCL,
and
yeah, and Wood. Okay.
yeah, I rate those drafts as well because what you're essentially doing is, unless you are keeping money in the bank, or if you have like a double move where you go from, let's say, Trent to Poro and DCL to Solanke or something like that, or Wood to Solanke, like you said, maybe Wood's fixtures are slightly worse than, not slightly, they are definitely worse than Everton's. That could also make sense, but it's just about how robust you want your draft to be, because these transfers booked in just seem to be a little iffy, given that the international break is after game week 8, game week 7, and after game week 11 as well. So just trying to save as many free transfers as I can, to be honest.
Yeah, and to be fair, in the forward position, since we're just there just aren't too many options with João Pedro out. So you're really playing with, especially if you have Haaland in your team already, you're really just playing between Solanke, maybe Watkins, which I think is a stretch on budget, and then Havertz in the short term as a short term play, and then the picks that we've talked about. In the midfield position, though, I think that's where there's a lot more choice. You can still consider it as I have, because I feel like one thing that people are sort of missing out too is maybe like this is the first time that he's like truly fully fit, and he's closer to a 95-minute player than anything. So there's some value in that, whereas a lot of the other players can arguably still be early subs. And I think when you factor that, Eze is still an incredible pick. Luis Diaz, do we want to just quickly jump onto him? I think one thing to mention is he's running hot, 100%. Underlying data has been incredible, 100%. But Liverpool's fixtures are a little bit worse, right? They started the season with the best fixtures on attack. We know that. They still have one good fixture to go, really, from that point of view. And then it's Crystal Palace, then Chelsea, then Arsenal, then Brighton, then Aston Villa. So that actually is genuinely some subpar run of games. And I think Aston Villa, we can even say that they've looked decent on defense this season. So for me, this is the time to bet against Liverpool offense a little bit. I'm not saying that there's an absolute need or something to swerve them, but with Gakpo playing so well, with Jota still, whenever he's actually playing football, playing well, that the minutes are still very dicey, and Chiesa is now a part of the team too. So I do think that I'm not buying that Luis Diaz is now a Salah type player. And I mean, we're talking about a guy who scored 5 goals in 5 games, playing 70 minutes a game. To maintain this run of games or form, I mean, you're basically telling me that he's better than prime Salah. So, I mean, let's try and relax a bit, I think, with how good he is, because he's great, but he's not that great.
I don't have anything to add, to be honest, because the biggest advantage that Luis Diaz has given Wildcard Sixers is the price rise and the ability to
double
bank
rise. Yeah.
Double rise and ability to bank 0.1 million. Other than that, I just don't see why anyone would go for Luis Diaz on Wildcard 6. Even if you had the most insane team value, I would think that you would want to go for someone like Cole Palmer, because like Fran discussed earlier, even though he doesn't play 90 minutes, the draft you end up with is more of a
Robust
2.5 or 1.5, whatever you want to call it, medium draft. So combine that with picks like Saka and Holland, I just don't see why you would stop at. So there would only be 2 instances, right? Either you are short on cash and you want to still invest in Liverpool attack, and you don't want Salah, obviously, because he's too expensive. Like Fran said, I just don't think the fixtures are good enough, and the EV reflects that. It's not that we are talking about this based off our feelings. The EV also reflects the fact that Liverpool don't have a great run coming up, and I would like to sell Salah, honestly, but I didn't have enough free transfers to get that accomplished. So I'm just going to hold on to him till wildcard 8 because I'm most likely wildcarding in 8, and that will be a good time to get rid of him. But for Luis Diaz, it's not going to take long. He's definitely going to start against Wolves because he was
Yeah, I
fully
think that's
rested
obvious.
against West Ham. But other than that, there is no guarantee of long-term minute security because he has to also play against Bologna, and then there's the added risk of every single game the player is playing. You also risk slight niggles, injuries. It doesn't have to be like a long-term injury. It's I just don't see why you would want to go there.
Yeah, I think one thing to mention too is like if you are someone who's very sensitive to form and you would like to play sensitively to form, you can see how the markets react as well. And the market odds for Luis Diaz are not stratospheric, right? He's not suddenly catapulted himself to Palmer Saka levels. And maybe you can say that even the markets will take time to adjust. But, you know, like I've just read a chat message and it says that he's, you know, Palmer 23, 24. Palmer took like 8 penalties last season. Palmer also played close to 90 minutes every single match, you know? So yeah, it's not happening. I'll put my name down here that he's not going to break 20 goals this season. If he does, fair enough, then I'm just an idiot. But yeah, that's that.
Fair enough.
Shall we move on to, I think in the midfield, there are some other picks that could be interesting. There's the likes of Bowen, Foden, those sorts of players that I think are still sort of in that bracket where if you don't have any confidence in Bruno, I guess you can consider these players, even Madison, arguably. But would I really want to go there? Probably not. And then Semenyo and Tavernier, I think we discussed them earlier on too. There's actually Savinho as well, who I do think is very, very interesting. But my issue with someone like Savinho is, even though he's the starting out-and-out right winger, he's probably going to be a 75-minute sub most games. So at the end of the day,
and the city spot, right? The city spot,
yeah,
because you either go with Lewis and Guardiola and Holland, obviously, or you go with Rico Lewis and Ederson, which are the two variants that I've seen. And both those variants leave you with simply no room to have yet another Man City player. So, like you said, with 75 minutes, again, there's no need to risk that. I agree that he's going to be a pretty good pick, but you can compensate for those picks with higher mins players like Eze. I believe that Eze is definitely one of the best picks, although his value has definitely diminished with the lack of penalties. But if Mateta is not impervious to a 45th minute sub, I think that maybe assigning around 15 to 20% penalty weightage to Eze is not far fetched, because that's what I was thinking initially when the review reset the penalty weightages.
yeah,
That Eze is being given far too much penalty weightage, and obviously review was proven right once again, where Mateta got subbed at halftime, so Eze was on penalties for the entire second half against United. With Bowen and Madison, actually, I had one question in general. What would make you pick them? Because I'm looking at EV, and Bowen, for example, shows up pretty high on expected value as well.
Yeah, he's got good value.
Has that more to do with when do you get to play him and what sort of price point you're looking at? Because he is at 7.5 and Eze is 6.9, so there's definitely some saving there with Eze.
Yeah, I think it's sort of what you're saying, right? It's like if you believe Eze's the truth per se, then he's still more valuable than those players. And then there's Mbumo as well. And then it's also how many players can you afford? And do you think they're better than Bruno? And maybe they are, maybe they're not. Because with Madison, we know he's always in a slightly earlier sub. That's guaranteed.
And he did not start today, so that just means that he's definitely not going to be playing 90 minutes anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever see a point in his career where it makes sense to play him 90 minutes a game without sort of seeing a very tired, lethargic version of him for the last 10 minutes of a match. And I think Ange is very comfortable making that sub every game. Is he a good pick? I think he definitely is. And I think you'd consider these picks more on the basis that their ownership is low and taking it on as free risk, as opposed to necessarily, I think they're like outright optimal, if that makes sense. That's kind of how I see some of these players. But Bowen's definitely interesting, and I found that obviously, you know, we've always seen this in the past, but yeah, you injected a little bit of market odds, and Bowen looks that much better as well. So there's a bit of that. Shall we move on to? Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say the surprising thing is he's half decent even on just MD.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a big shift from last season, right? Because of the price change.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so what about the budget midfielders? There's a lot of people who just don't have the mins that we trust. I think Dibbling is one of them. Carvalho is one of them. Carvalho has penalty share and review, which I have absolutely no clue why that's the case. He shouldn't. Or like it just shouldn't be there to reflect anything, because it's just, what world is Carvalho playing 20 minutes of football more than Mbeumo? Like, it's just, you don't want to see that being reflected at all. So yeah, that's weird. There's simply just going Winks or a 4.4, I guess. There's also Tavernier that I've mentioned, which I feel like, you know, if you want to kind of tap into the Bournemouth experience, maybe he's a pick that's interesting. I have to say that I'm not super clued into Bournemouth right now, but I feel like he is a small pick that's going under the radar a little bit. Other than that, I don't think there's too many picks. Like, I have no interest in Smith Rowe whatsoever. And a lot of the other picks...
McNeil seems to be one of the highest EV picks in that price range.
Who, sorry?
5.5. McNeil, Dwight McNeil.
Oh yeah, McNeil's definitely one of them. And Mavididi as well, I suppose, to be fair.
Yeah, but with Mavididi, the way he's quickly gotten into the side makes me think there's a chance he'll quickly go out of the side as well with equal speed. Maybe I'm wrong on that, and Leicester fans can correct me, but
yeah,
I don't think even Leicester fans have too much experience with Steve Cooper. So I just don't want to go there. But with McNeil, it's interesting, right? Because he's never had inspiring underlines ever. But looks like, again, it's a steady pick where he plays every single game. He plays a certain amount of minutes every single game. He's on all set pieces. There is no chance he takes penalties, but just the overall effect of being on the pitch all the time seems to be contributing to him being pretty high. But the problem is Rodgers is higher than him on EV.
That's the what I was just going to jump into. Yeah. It's just Rodgers, right? Rodgers is that good.
Yeah.
So I think either you go for Rodgers. I don't see why you'd want to double up on people at that price point. I don't think it's worth it. Nope. I guess Amad Diallo is the one where maybe you can step in and just tame people a little bit, but look, he's clearly going to be broken per se if he starts every game. But where are you at on his minutes?
I believe that Ten Hag definitely does trust him, and he wants to play him as much as possible. But the odd benching is not going to surprise me, given that we are in Europa and the games are almost every week. So there's a game next week, Porto away. Then we have a gap. Then we have 2 more games midweek. Then there's a gap where we play Carabao Cup, I think, and then there's 2 more games. So it's just one midweek after another, and I don't think I have enough information with Garnacho, Rashford, Ahmad's rotation, and Zirkzee plus Højlund as well now, where I can firmly say, okay, Ahmad is definitely going to play every single Premier League game. So I would just not go there. Because we said on this podcast 2 weeks ago about Rashford that I said that his mins looked to be a bit secure, and he was immediately benched the next game.
Complete shock.
100%. I don't think a single United predictor got 11 out of 11 in that week. I got 10 because I obviously predicted Rashford to start. But other than that, it's because of that Rashford benching, I'm even less keen on someone like Ahmad, because Rashford, we all know, is a hot streak player, and if he is willing to bench someone like Rashford, the Ahmad benching will be trivial for him.
That's true. Yeah, I think your point's completely right though. Like, at the end of the day, if you want someone at that price point, you go Rodgers. If you don't care, then you can kind of ignore them, because these players are always at the price point where you don't necessarily need these players unless you actually have like deep rotation, if that makes sense. Which is also why, for example, within my latest draft, I don't technically have Rodgers in it. But as I said, if let's say I find out on the weekend that Havertz is probably going to make way for Solanke because Son has a knock and that's already Solanke, front loaded with pen share. Well, hey, I'll probably be going back into Rodgers. But yeah, I think those are pretty interesting discussions. Any thoughts on maybe like any thoughts on maybe just shifting off the defense? I think if we just discuss, can you just discuss Dallo as well, since we're just on the topic of United? Is he? Do you think he's like the most nailed defender for United? Because I personally do, but I know I've seen some people say that maybe they expect him to play 85% of the time. But I think when it comes to the Premier League, I just can't see why he's not nailed. But yeah,
good question. There's a game called Dream Team where it counts European games as well as part of the scoring, and I bought Dallo last week because I was so sure that he's going to play both games or 2 games a week that I bought him in because I can get that much more points out of him. I had the choice to go between him and Porro, and I chose to go for him because it was a toss up, right? Do I expect Porro to play every single midweek game? I did not, and that is exactly what transpired. Now, unfortunately, Dallo did not keep a clean sheet against FC20, which is a separate discussion. But given the fact that United's XGC has not been too terrible compared to last season,
no, it's been
1.14 something around that. Yeah, some improvement. And Dallo seems to be the one guy who is definitely nailed either as right back or left back, wherever Ten Hag wants to field, let's say, Malacia or Mazraoui, Dallo will play on the opposite wing. So there is no doubt about him. He is showing up on my Wildcard 8 draft, by the way. So that's interesting. In 2 weeks' time, my opinion is going to change. Yeah. And he seems to be at the ideal price point where if Rico Lewis keeps starting, I'm pretty sure Rico Lewis will rise in price again. And that would probably make him unaffordable for me, or maybe in the range of it's too late to invest in him now because he's already 4.8 or 4.9. So in that situation, I would definitely go for Dallo. So good thing you brought it up because he seems to be the only nailed defender in that United defense right now. Maybe De Ligt, but Euro is coming back soon, so I don't know if they want to split minutes between Maguire, Martinez, Euro, and De Ligt.
Yeah, and then I guess there's also the piece on De Ligt where ultimately he's the same price as Dallo, right? So yeah. I wonder where you'd lean there. What do you think about Guardiola's minutes? You think he's absolutely safe?
I would defer to Luke, obviously, who spends much more time analyzing this stuff.
Luke did record, I think, an episode with Let's Talk FPL, a Spaces episode. So do have a look at that on Andy's sort of Twitter page. I think he had some discussions with Praz too. So if that helps anyone. So
he, Andy spoke with Luke about the most nailed City defender probably for Champions League, UCL Fantasy. And Luke said Guardiola as well. So that's the reason I went with Guardiola in UCL Fantasy, which is why I also feel like if you had some doubts with him, I would just do Raya to Ederson in your Wildcard 6 draft, not yours, but whoever has gone for Raya. You can easily do Raya to Ederson and then Guardiola to Porro or Guardiola to Saliba. The problem with Saliba, like you've already mentioned, is it's booking in a transfer to Porro in 2 weeks' time, so might as well start off with Pedro Porro. But definitely, if I were to choose one defender, it would definitely be Guardiola. So coming to Raya, actually, what is your thought? What are your thoughts on his situation? Because it's going to be really interesting given that it's come at a really bad time for managers who wanted to go for Raya and a non-playing goalkeeper combination, which you are not with. So you don't really care about that. But what do you think he's going to start on the weekend, or is it still dicey?
It's a weird situation, right? Because I think there have been some weird Twitter accounts that have sort of chimed in on this, I feel. But we know that they don't have much information. So one account has already mentioned that Raya won't play for the weekend. But I don't think there's too much substance in that. If I was wildcarding, I don't think it's actually as simple as if you don't go Raya and you don't back Havertz, you have to go Saliba. Because I do think that if you actually have the faith in Guardiola minutes, it's actually quite tough to justify going Saliba. And maybe you have to skip Arsenal triple up, is my hot take. Because there's still the likes of Liverpool, which I think, like, on an extended run of games, I actually prefer Liverpool defenders maybe over Saliba for the long term. And as you said, Saliba is kind of a booked transfer. So you can just circumvent that, I think, by just not going for him. Do you lose value in the short term? Yes, but it really just depends on... I think some people have more luxuries than me, because if you've been rolling into this wild card with more free transfers, then yeah, there's no reason to sidestep at triple Arsenal. But for myself, where I have no free transfers now, that's something I need to consider. Do I think he plays this weekend? I think he does. But I have, like, we have no information, right? And it's Arsenal. I think there have been times where Arteta says something like, we will see, and the player doesn't play. Like, for example, in game week 38, he gave no information about Saka. Seemed like he said Saka was fine. Saka didn't play. And then there were some times during the season where he was actually a little bit honest and a player played. Or, you know, he was perceived to be honest. So, yeah, I mean, my experience with him just makes me think that Raya's going to play. Because why even chime in on it? But there is a lot of doubt. And I think people need to just consider how important triple Arsenal is to them. And it goes back to things like free transfer value. And it also goes back to, why would you want to start the wild card with 10 players? If you can avoid
also,
it.
FPL Caesar is saying that their source is seeing it on Reddit, by the way, on the Raya thing. So
yeah,
maybe...
which is what I've sort of seen. But I don't know the authenticity.
So I am not going to back any of these leaks in quotes, but I do think that if there is a chance that Raya is going to be benched on a wild card, why would you risk that? I just don't see any need to risk it. Unless you want to go for Raya and a 4.5 million goalkeeper, at that stage, I think Flecken and Verbruggen is a better combination anyway. So this doubt should probably sway you away from Raya. I don't see why you would go for him, unless, like you said, you are of the firm opinion that Arteta is just trolling and Raya is going to start at the weekend. Because Neto is definitely as good a deputy as Ramsdale, if not slightly better, because of his insane PSXG delta years at was it Valencia that you told me about?
I think Neto actually had
before he joined Barcelona.
Yeah,
he had some of the most crazy
I mean,
over performances on post shot XG.
I don't know if his Valencia years were amazing, but probably that. But he was pretty poor in Bournemouth, right?
Yeah,
he was pretty poor.
He was shocking,
and he's 35.
And we don't count stuff like, dropping the ball and none of that counts when it comes to PSXG delta. So
just like common
maybe
mistakes.
he isn't. You're right. So maybe he isn't as good a deputy as Ramsdale just because of his age. But Flecken and also, why haven't you gone? Oh, I guess that's the review thing, right? You will definitely go Valdimarsson because there's no need to not go for both Brentford keepers, right? Or are you keeping that slot for a Brentford attacker?
Yeah, I probably will just go Valdimarsson, but I guess it's just leaving room for Carvalho if he's like actually a decent pick.
Or Schade, depending on which player gets more minutes, right?
Yeah. But Schade, that benching last week was I think that's like a statement of intent in terms of like what your importance at is in the squad.
I think those two things we definitely discussed, and at least I was of the incorrect opinion based on what happened later on, where I was thinking Schade had more minutes than Carvalho last week and the Rashford thing. So a few lessons to be learned there. I'm not sure what the lessons are, other than outcome is always right. But I love the double standards. When it's a win, you take the win. When it's a loss, you chalk it up to outcome. So we move.
That's football, mate. It was a good decision if I got points.
Yeah, exactly. I saw a good question actually about Mikalenko, because we discussed a lot of defenders, and I think we can
Everton,
probably move on to captaincy after
I think
this. But
Everton, it actually is
yeah,
those two teams again, right? Like Everton and Nottingham Forest. Like,
yeah,
maybe if
Aina
you want
or
to just give your thoughts on them.
Mikalenko. Yeah. So I would say Aina and Mikalenko would be my picks from either defense, because Moreno is clearly not an option anymore. He was subbed at halftime in the previous game. So if you're looking at a 4.3 million defender, for example, Greaves and Mikolenko seem to be the defender combination of choice to save as much money as possible. So I just feel like if you want to save money because you somehow are left with, for example, I check my selling value, and for the first time this season, I've gone below 100 million now. So I have 99.9 million to sell. So I hope there's going to be some insane price farming in Game Week 8. Otherwise, I'm going to be left with a million or two short when it comes to the latter half of the season. But from what we spoke to Ollie, it seems like Mikalenko is going to play most games, and his fitness has definitely been an issue. So
True.
maybe he will be rested in games that are not Premier League games. But if it's one game a week, I think he is still probably the best defender at his price point, if you don't want to go for Greaves.
Do you want to speak about where we think the Everton defense is at? Because, okay, the argument, I guess, is how good is Branthwaite really? And why is there such a big drop off in Everton? Is it like Onana related as well?
How bad is Keane? Yeah.
I think Onana
I
leaving
think
is quite important too, as it turns out.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. Absolutely. Also because I saw a lot of the athletic posts and stuff like that about Onana, where he wasn't ever a true six. As in, for example, United, the whole hype around Onana that he's going to come in and help solve all our problems was never going to be the case, because he's always been that guy who is, to quote some people on the internet, like he's the next Yaya Toure. But of course, that's a gross exaggeration of current events, or maybe not, given the fact that he's been scoring so many goals lately. But you're right. I think Onana leaving and Keane playing instead of Branthwaite has had a huge impact. I also feel like maybe it's also because the desperation factor isn't quite there yet compared to last season,
Right.
which is a completely baseless thing. There is nothing to point to that. I just mean in terms of tactics, where you clearly focus on trying to not concede. So everything you do on the pitch is focused around not conceding rather than scoring.
Yeah.
So it's more about that rather than the motivation per se, because I clearly don't believe in the second thing. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a weird one, right? Because I think, we've seen some really poor performances, and naturally team strength models will sort of adjust to that. And then I think, look, the reality is, even though Branthwaite might come back, I think they just look objectively a lot worse than they did last season. And I think it must be a mixture of things like Onana as well. So I'm pretty low on Everton, I'd have to say, from a defensive point of view. But if you want to spend 4.3 on a defender, you want to ignore a 4.5. Like, for example, when I look at Davis on my team, like, can you just go Mikalenko instead? Well, of course you can go Mikalenko instead. Because, if you just want someone who is like a 4 spot in your team, you can kind of play them like whenever you want. That's what Mikalenko should be able to do. But as you mentioned, the availability thing is a genuine issue. Like, he has not been fit for a long time now. And part of it was because I think he played, and he chose to play in the Euros, right? Where he wasn't ready to play. He didn't seem fit the whole time. And at one point, he was just benched from the Ukrainian team because he wasn't fit. And that probably ruined his ability to stay fit for the summer and to start the season properly. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I have no faith in them, though. And I think I'd rather spend the 4.0 on nobody or the 4.5 on somebody, is sort of how I feel about Mikalenko. With Aina, though, I think that's actually some really good value there. So, yeah, if you have confidence in Nottingham Forest and the numbers that they're posting up so far, why not?
Yeah, completely on board the Aina pick, to be honest. He's playing both right back. He can play both right back and left back. So, just like Dallo, seems like the manager completely trusts him on either side. And if you want a Nottingham Forest defender, I mean, Milinkovic is like the crux of that defense, but he's clearly not an FPL relevant pick. So Aina is definitely on my radar on Game Week 8. But again, their fixtures aren't too great from an XGC perspective. So it's just you want to rotate between the 5 defenders, I guess, if you want to start with Aina. Otherwise, Dunk just seems to be that guy. Again, I've always advocated for Paul Van Heck, and he got an assist, right?
Yeah, he did.
In
Although
the previous
that
game.
was a pretty good header.
It was. So I just want to say that I will continue to back Van Heck and possibly go for Van Heck on wildcard when I wildcard in it.
That's fair. What are your thoughts on, I guess, so like someone like Greaves in that spot, right? Do you think it just makes more sense to go for someone like Greaves in that 5th spot if you already have a really strong defense? Or are you comfortable, like, if let's say review, for example, like within my team, I've got a 4.5 like Davis, what would you be doing in that situation yourself?
So as you've seen at the start of the season, I chose a formation where I did not have a single 4 million defender because I believe that robustness was the key, given that we could roll 5 free transfers. Now it's actually been detrimental to my team because I've had all my players play. Yeah, so I did not get any Jamie auto subs, but I did get 2 Dunk clean sheets, to be fair. So it's not that.
But that's experience as well, right? In a sense, like where you're jaded because of that, not because in theory it's always bad. If that makes sense.
I completely agree with that. So I'm trying to be as impartial as I can. If you look at the minutes, I think the 4.5 upper or the lower bound of 4.5 has actually worked in a sense, where I do have a lot of options and I can rotate between them. And the worst case scenario is I play 4 defenders if needed, because I do have that luxury. And most of the defenders are either so premium that I don't care what fixture they have, they still have good EV, or they have a good enough fixture where their EV is comparable to, let's say, a 5 million to 6 million midfielder. So there is definitely value in that. And for someone like you who's actually managed to not lose a lot of team value and gain some team value, maybe it makes sense. But
I think
if you have low team value, then I guess Greaves is the only compromise. Like, for example, if someone has 0.5 less than you, what would you say is the one thing they could do to get to a team as close as yours? It would be to go from Davis to Greaves, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I just want to point out to everyone here, it's like, if we do find out that Son actually has, like, if Son's not going to play the next match, I can see myself immediately making a couple of moves. I think what I would do, would you go for a João Pedro on a wild card? Genuine question.
Ooh. My biggest concern is the price drops because his ownership has gone up so much.
Ooh, good point. Good point. Yeah, because if he's not playing, he could drop again. True. Good point. So I think the team that I would probably have if let's say Son is out, I think I'd have something like Fleck and Iverson. Sorry, I guess Fleck and Valdemarson. But I really do want to keep a little bit of room for Carvalho maybe down the line. I'd probably go Lewis, Saliba, Gabriel, Brentford defender Dunk, Brentford defender 4.5. So this time no Davis. Just because I think to rotate around Arsenal, it's a bit different compared to rotating around City. In the midfield, probably Saka, Bruno, Rogers, Eze, and Mbumo. And then I'd probably go Holland, Calvert-Lewin, Solanke, I think is probably what I would do. That gives me 0 in the bank, which is like another elite draft that I was thinking about. But then it is basically the template, I guess. But it has Bruno, so why not?
It has Bruno. I think that's the biggest difference because people are trying to get to...
Maybe the question here is, what do you actually think is the best Brentford defender? And maybe the chat can chime in as well. Like, do you think it's Collins or do you think it's Pinnock? Because I've been speaking to someone like Elevenify, and obviously he doesn't allow me to... He's a Brentford fan, but he doesn't allow me to use his advice and hold him to it. So I think he says that he likes Collins for now, but he's been surprised by Pinnock's minutes. I think the reality is they probably both play an insane amount of minutes, and Sepp Vandenberg doesn't play. but he is someone who they spent a lot of money on. So I think you kind of have to make a mental decision of which is the better 4.5. So what are your thoughts on that?
Up until you said the final piece, as in about Pinnock, I was thinking Collins is perhaps the defender with the most minutes.
Yeah.
But and maybe this opinion is being driven by the fact that I saw the error he made in the previous game that Brentford played.
The Pinnock mistake?
Yeah, the Pinnock mistake.
Okay, yeah.
So maybe even for fans, the immediate wound of seeing a mistake like that being made is driving them to clamor for, let's say, Vandenberg starting with Collins. But you're probably right. When they don't play three at the back, it's the default is still Collins and Pinnock, and Vandenberg slowly creeps into the starting lineup because Thomas Frank clearly is trying to play him as much as possible, or quite literally trying to get as much as he can out of Vandenberg. So it's really tricky. So I would just skip all of that and go for Flecken, if I'm being honest, just because I don't want the headache. But if you were to force me to choose one, I think I'd still back Collins to have the most minutes. But it's really I couldn't split them either way.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, really good question though.
But I think that's a lot of the wildcard discussion, I'd say, and quite a deep dive. Do you think we've missed anything here? I think we did miss out on Lewis, but I do think that Lewis is one of those picks where you just make an educated punt. I think he's worth it. I own Lewis. I'm keeping Lewis. I'll wait for deadline leaks. If he's not in the team, if he's not starting, for example, things will change. But for now, I'm pretty comfortable in him. There's a lot of other picks at 4.5 who are very interesting. And I think, once again, you have to look at, for example, when you go for an Arsenal player or a City player or a Liverpool player, look at the poor games, right? Liverpool and Arsenal do play in Game Week 9, so that's always like an identifiably poor game. For City, for example, some of the poor games that they have would be like around 10, 11, 12. So then you kind of need to think about having a defender that's a little bit stronger there. I don't know, for example, let's say people who are strong on 9, I think it's the Ipswich defender that I talked about, like Davis, Dunk, even Pinnock arguably actually is a good fixture then. And then, yeah, if it really comes down to it, if you go for, let's say, Saliba, Guardiola, Robertson, these are all players at the 6.0 price point, and you always have the opportunity to move those players into Porro, which I think is a luxury, but you should probably take that luxury. And I'm not the type of manager where I think with my team value being good enough, I need to start with Porro, so I feel like I can always circumvent starting with Porro, but that's kind of where my thoughts are right now.
No, and you bought Lewis at 4.5, right? So I think for you, it's a no-brainer just to persist with him. And this is another good reason for having 5 decent defenders in your team, because the moment you feel like I'm not saying this is going to happen, but in case it happens that Lewis just becomes a dead option, you don't need to rush out to sell him. You can just keep him on your bench as the 15th player, and then you have more flexibility when it comes to your starting 11. So if you own Lewis, I just don't think you should. There's any doubt. But the more his price rises, the more it's a close decision in terms of buying him or steering clear.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, I think that's pretty comprehensive. Goalkeepers I do find is very boring. I think it's literally Raya, Fleck, and Ederson. And if you decided to go somewhere else, honestly, respect to you. One thing I want to say, though, actually, in terms of goalkeepers, is when we plan for the wild card and we use models, we have the same average rate of decay for goalkeepers applied to all the other players in the game. But in my opinion, goalkeepers, you should probably look at them with less decay, is my genuine thought. Because you're less likely to use transfers on goalkeepers. You're less likely to care about short-term rotation with goalkeepers. And you're probably wanting to sort of minimize the amount of value spent on them, but then also making sure that you get a good long-term horizon of EV with them. And that's why I kind of think, like, when I look at goalkeepers, that I don't know what's the best approach to do this. I tend to always just find, like, what I think is an objectively good pairing for the foreseeable future. So what's the best way to do this? Probably download the EVs of these players. and then actually just see what you think is the best goalkeeper. And xPPM is just a good metric for that, right? Because it doesn't really apply the decay that heavily. But yeah, I think if you can look at goalkeepers without decay, lock them in, I think that's the best way to look at goalkeepers. Potentially, you know, Verbruggen, Flecken might actually be the most strongest, robust pairing, because when you're thinking about, let's be honest, I can't think about what's going to happen to my goalkeeper in Gaming 15 right now. Okay, it's way too far in the future, but you should sort of be thinking, I have no plans to do anything on goalkeepers, and it's probably the move that I'll care about the absolute least. So yeah, like when I'm thinking about goalkeepers, I think the best way to approach it probably is just to look at maybe a literally like close to 0 decay, and then see what pairing you like the most, and then maybe build teams around what you find acceptable. So like, you know, what you find to be acceptable if you went Raya plus Iverson, or Flecken plus Murat, or Flecken plus Verbruggen, and then solve with that in mind, I think is probably the nicest way I would do it. Because what I've noticed with Fleck and Murat, and I think just sort of discussing with some people about it, is yeah, I'm probably, am I overemphasizing a 0.4 EV gain over the first 5 weeks, when in reality I don't care about it in the long run, because of what Mr. John Milton Keynes said. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
The only thing I've thought about is the 4.5 rotating goalkeepers make a lot of sense, but also at the same time, like you said, if you're not sacrificing too much EV by going 4.54 million from the same team, I just want to go for it.
That's
because
what I like doing as well.
I want to reduce my decision space.
Yeah.
And one of the key components of reducing my decision space is having just one starting goalkeeper. So whether it be Ederson, Raya, Flecken, Verbruggen, whichever one you want to go for, I just don't want to be making the decision week in, week out. So this is more of optimizing my decision-making time rather than optimizing my expected value, which I believe to be not equally important, but there's some importance that I do place on that. So personally, I would definitely go for someone like Flecken, Valdimarsson, or Flecken and Iverson, just to avoid all the headache. But I do rate managers who take on the risk of investing 0.5 more, or in Murich's case 0.4 more, to have that rotating option.
Yeah, I agree, because I think that, and that's why I think when speaking to Ollie, I definitely thought about why a solver was spitting Flecken plus Murat, for example, but his point on Flecken plus Verbruggen actually resonated with me a lot. And then I actually literally just thought about it and think he was right. Like, if you want to spend the like, if you actually are going to consider Murat, then you may as well consider just going Verbruggen, because that's going to edge out in the long term. Whereas obviously, like, yeah, if you want to go Raya, just go Raya 5.5. I don't think anything beats that. In terms of 4.5, I think Flecken is the king. So
yeah,
I think that's where we're at. Verbruggen very close, of course. But then that's actually where I think the short term EV kind of comes around and says hello, because why not just grab a little bit more of that in the short term? But that's it in terms of wildcard. Shall we move on to captaincy for this game?
Yeah, I think we've spoken mostly about captaincy, but just to recap, top 3.
That doesn't seem right. Little
Saka's missing, but
for me. Here it is.
Yeah, no problem. So it's Saka, Salah, Palmer, and Holland, in that order. So, like Fran said, if you own Saka, captain Saka. If you don't own Saka, then it's a close decision between the other 3. I'm just going to captain Holland because I own Salah and Holland, and I'm just looking at the worst case scenarios where if Salah plays 80 minutes, what's the downside, and what happens if Holland plays, let's say, 85 minutes or 82 minutes. And looking at that, I'm just going to captain Holland. I know I'm going to lose EV a lot in these next 2 weeks because I don't own Saka. But the thing is, Wildcard 8 also does not have Saka, because Gameweek 8
it's actually a week where you really would consider. Like, for example, even though I'm actually getting Haaland to Salah as a recommended transfer, I do think that I'll be actively trying to find ways to go out of Saka instead, out of him, and you know, like, makes sort of making moves around that. Like, maybe Saka to Son on Gameweek 8 is something that I'm considering a little bit more so if he's alive then. But yeah, that's kind of a really good point about Wildcard 8. You're just simply going to have maybe one Arsenal on Wildcard 8.
One defender or the goalkeeper, and I think that's about it, because Bournemouth away is their last good fixture for a while, like you mentioned, with Liverpool in Gameweek 9. So by good, I mean exceptionally good, because Arsenal mostly have good fixtures in the season. So it's not that we can't roll through with our assets, especially given that Saka has actually returned in every single game week this season.
Yeah.
I just feel like that's one way of taking free risk, because I rarely do it. So this is not free risk, by the way. This is extremely a penalizing risk. Like there's a heavy EV penalty to this risk, but nonetheless, I don't have any option but to go for it.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Should we go to chat questions?
Yeah, I think we've addressed most of them. So
I think we
maybe
have. I'll let me just take a keen eye through them, and then we'll try and address stuff that I think is actually relevant. So honestly, hello to everyone who's been here. Thank you guys for watching the entire episode. Tiggy, Trini, Chai, Dream Brothers, Sonica, Majed, all these sorts of people who've been on the stream.
Yeah, absolutely.
For quite a while. Appreciate the support, Cesar, as well. Let's see. So people talk about Murillo. I think that's fine if you just want the minutes. Really just depends on how much you value their offense. My wildcard doesn't have Liverpool, but I think there are worlds where I'd consider one Liverpool, like maybe keeping Trent, and I think that's acceptable. Someone asking about going for a 4.4 mid. I'd consider it if you need the money. But yeah, Would
you go for Robbo over Saliba on the wildcard?
No, I don't think so. Because as I kind of said, I feel like Saliba is like a nice convenient transfer to Porro, and if I went for Robbo, then I kind of feel like I'd rather go for Guardiola, because I feel like I'm kind of getting better short-term value from Guardiola, and his minutes are arguably as shaky as Robbo's, like I feel. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like I think either you maximize the short term, or you kind of look for the better long-term pick, and that might just be Guardiola in that situation. We did discuss Savio Madison.
Where do you have Robbo's minutes at? Because that's one player where I'm a little dicey, because Simicas played in the Champions League and
I think speaking to, like, for example, someone like Pink Green, who actually like watched the game, it was very clear that Simicas was awful. Yes, but the reality now is that I think that obviously at his age and his fitness, I think Robbo is more of an early sub than Trent. Yes, of course you can say Bradley is a better quality player, but now you're seeing that Trent's fully fit. He's playing 90s. Robbo is still getting subbed at maybe 80. So I think his minutes on review seem fair, like 82.
Okay, fair enough.
People still like Eze. I think that's fair. Sorry, won't do rating wildcards for now. Mavididi is cheap. I think that's true. But the issue, once again, is no pen share for now. But then there's obviously worlds where Vardy gets subbed off early, and I think that's a reality. And maybe if Mavididi gets better minutes, then he's actually, a good sort of pick if people want to go for that. I did share my wild card. We did discuss McNeil. How vital is Trent? I think I actually like Trent so much more than Robertson, and I do compare Trent to the likes of Palmer, or even like someone like maybe Watkins, where it's like if you have good team value, you probably want to go for them. I think Mayer sort of made a post about it. Maybe Watkins not so much, but I think definitely with Palmer and Trent, like these are players that are definitely, if you have high team value, you'd consider on wildcard 6. The issue with Palmer is he's more of a transfer to Son. The thing with Trent, though, and the beauty of Trent, is that you can keep him for like the foreseeable future. So if you have that transfer value and that team value, then keeping Trent makes a lot of sense. And I'll still consider it up until the deadline. Someone mentioned Guardiola's going to drop in price tonight, potentially. I don't have Guardiola in my actual draft, like in my team, but I'll bring him in after the drop, right? If that happens. Pinnock is a little more dunky, personally. I like to see that.
Aaron L says that surely you two are related, which I found to be quite amusing.
That's amusing. I don't think we sound the same. Other than the fact that we wear glasses and have black hair, I don't know. I don't think that's.
Yeah. Mine's already graying, to be honest. So maybe in a few years.
I think I have a couple white hairs. Maybe one. Okay.
Yeah, my beard is quite graying now, so it's going to be really different.
And I'm incapable of growing a full beard, so. Okay, and I think, thanks a lot, Dream Brother, for the sort of interaction. I think we've sort of interacted with you quite a fair bit. I think that's. You don't think hot take though from United? You don't think he doesn't think I need triple Arsenal and 1 is enough? I think on a wildcard 6, I'm gonna have to disagree with you. On a wildcard 8, absolutely 1 is enough. And maybe you're responding to that as well. Just be happy you have your hair, boys. Thank you, my friends, and thank you everyone who's been watching. Do you have any sort of closing comments?
No, just good luck to everyone on Wildcard 6 because it's perhaps comparable to Wildcard 8 from last season, where so many people deployed the chip and it mostly went well for people. So hopefully it's a similar thing. I'm just hoping that Wildcard 8 this season is not going to be the same as Wildcard 10 from last season, where most of the people playing the chip in Wildcard 10 did not benefit from it. So just pick the players with the most EV and hopefully everything goes well. Thanks for joining.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And please like and subscribe, all the usual stuff. Rate 5 stars on Spotify, etc. Other social media platforms. Take care and enjoy this week of FPL.
See you next week. Bye.
Actually, sorry. Some people actually asking about my rank this time last season. I think maybe like 100k or something like that. But I couldn't care less what my rank is because I feel like my peers made much better decisions than me close to the end of the last season. So if I actually played good FPL at the end of last season, I probably should have got a much better rank. But I played poorly, and didn't foresee that I'd get 4 injuries in 2 weeks when I wildcarded. So yeah. But the reality is, don't get caught up about rank now. There's a long way to go, and enjoy the season.